one solution among other, and to try to protect quality journalism in the jungle of disinformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elodie. Indeed, you started to actually answer a question that I had in mind after listening to your presentations, like what can we do? So it seems that based on your presentations, that the appearance of the net, the social media, is actually presenting traditional journalism rather with challenges than opportunities. So when we kick off the discussion, I would like to ask you to maybe reflect on whether traditional journalism actually can itself benefit or have benefited from the net and the social media. And in fact, to the two of you, I wanted to ask what you see as potential responses to the challenges that you have yourself presented, and then we would open up the floor for the audience.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, I think that what's happened to journalism on the net, as I said, it's still developing. So don't know how it's going to go, but it's been both wonderful and terrible. It's been wonderful because what happens now, much more than in the past, I think, is the ability of journalists and people who act like journalists but are not members of the national unions of journalists or even are paid by journalistic outlets to inquire, possibly just for themselves, to use this ecology of information to become much better informed, and sometimes to write it, maybe for themselves only, for a few people, or for more than a few people. So on the one hand, it has genuinely democratized things. And I just want to take a slight issue with Elodie was saying about Facebook and Twitter and so on. Clearly, when they shut down brave men and women's accounts, it's a bad thing, and it's very good that something like Reporters Sans Frontières should count these and make them public. But they also created it. And when I was doing some research in China and talking to Chinese journalists, many of them said we would have been lost without Weibo, the Chinese equivalent of Twitter. Lost without Facebook, lost without the net. That it's now much harder for people who try hard. The Communist Party and the administration, the government of China, try hard to stop, much harder than other authoritarian countries, to stop this stuff going out. It's much harder for them to, and it tends to come out, maybe lasts for a few seconds or a few minutes, and then it's shut down. But nevertheless, it is got out, and that, the same was true, I think, in the Middle East and Egypt when suppression came over this so-called Arab Spring, and still does. I mean, still in Egypt and in other countries, it's still this flame of desire to say this happened, which is, I think, the root desire of journalism. I want to say this happened. I know it. I saw it. I talked to the good sources who saw it. This happened, and that elementary urge is made possible, I think, to large degree nowadays by the social media and by the net. On the other hand, it's wreaked havoc in my profession. I'm okay because I work for the Financial Times, or semi-detached now, but I work for the Financial Times, and it survived and indeed thrived. But most of my friends are now saying, "Oh, no, I can't find a job. I've lost a job. I've been laid off," especially those who worked as foreign correspondents. So it's to a degree tragic. It does both. It operates in both ways, and it will continue to do so. It allows enormous amounts of great information, including investigative pieces, leaks like the Panama Papers, real stuff that benefits society, and it also gives platforms to vile, horrible material, terrible insults to public men and actually even more to women that probably were there before but were never so widely dispersed. It's both. It's where it takes human nature and amplifies it enormously so everybody can read or see it. And it will continue to be, I think.
Thanks. So yeah, it's kind of well documented when there are these big technological changes, then we tend to have a rather pessimistic and extreme opinion, but probably it's overly simplistic to say that if it's good or bad, and we should aim to gain a more complex picture, considering as many aspects as possible. So I don't think it's we can say whether it's good or not. Regarding the responses, I think, as for me, for instance, I genuinely believe in the power of education. I think media literacy should be taught both to lay people, both to experts, at early age, maybe even in primary schools. And of course, considering my own research background, I would very much stress the significance of language in all this, and teaching people how to develop a discursive sensitivity. If you will, that could make them less vulnerable to the various forms of manipulation, for instance, in private life and in public life, both.
Thank you very much. Elodie, do you want to add anything?
Yes, just to mention that technology is neutral, so we can use it in different ways, and so that's why we've got to challenge platforms, because yes, thanks to those platforms we got the Arab Spring, and we got a lot of voices which we defend as Reporters Without Borders, and they couldn't express themselves without the platforms. It's a reality. But at the same time, today we see that they are used as a tool and to undermine independent voices. So, and we all see the recent scandals with Facebook, and this is something the civil society needs to advocate about.
Thank you very much for all of you. We still have some time, so I will open the floor for questions. Do we need to pass this around?
My question is to Elodie, because you mentioned media ownership, and some years ago there was an initiative, European Citizens Initiative, and our Hungarian Europe Society was part of it, which faced two problems. One was media ownership, which is more a broader topic regarding oligarchs in Central and Eastern Europe, and people like Berlusconi in Italy and others, whether transparency can be guaranteed inside the European Union. And the other problem was certainly media supervisory boards like the Hungarian Media Council. These both of them are still issues, I guess. But talking about only the media ownership part, my question is whether you would agree that we need a European media regulation to increase transparency in such cases, and to make even to unmask such tricks what Berlusconi used when some of his media outlets were owned by his brother, for example, and the representative of the Berlusconi company at a debate said, it's not Berlusconi, it's just his brother. Certainly, everybody laughed, but it was a legal argument against the case what we tried to make.
If there are other questions at this point, maybe we could collect a few.
A couple of questions. Mike Sharpson from Columbia Journalism School. This is for Elodie and John. John raised a question of the economic basis of journalism today, which is a deeply important issue. But then it just made me think, what's the economic basis of Reporters Without Borders? And this is a relatively young organization, and how are you sustained? And that's one question. The other question was for Anna about media literacy. I mean, I also believe in education, but I'm sort of skeptical about media literacy efforts. Have you seen some that seem to have real impact?
Yes, there's one more question there.
I have actually two questions, if that's all right. One is...
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Elodie. I'm a PhD student, and I'm interested. One of my research topics is actually around copyright questions, for example, and especially in the European context. So one of my questions is there are a lot of things happening at the European scene right now, regulatory issues and media literacy. There's a lot of copyright questions, how to tackle it. I mean, I think Europe has tried to address not just one issue, but a broader, a lot of different things. What do you think is good from this, and what do you think is bad from this? Is this going to work? Because you said it's a global issue. Is a European intervention enough, as opposed to a nationalistic perspective? Or should we even go more global? Is that a possibility? So that's one question, so to speak. And the other one is more specifically in terms of quality journalism. Who should fund quality journalism?
Thank you very much. I think it would be great to get back the mic. And maybe then let's start with, I don't know who would like to start. We had questions about media regulation, what would work, what wouldn't work, and on what level we should really tackle it. Maybe we could start with this and bring together your question and question of Vishwan.
And then probably...
You go ahead, Anna.
Regarding regulation, it's a good question, always a tricky question. We always worry when states want to regulate or create a kind of ministry of truth. It's always a matter. And at the same time, I think that none of us wants a platform based in California to decide what is true, what isn't true in Europe. So that's why we really believe that we've got to develop self-regulation. Yeah, self-regulation for us is the clue, so we've got to maybe explore different paths, but this is the main way to strengthen independent media outlets. And even in Europe, so we discussed it with, we've got an office in Brussels, a representative in Brussels. We discussed it with the European Union, DG Connect, and we were a member of the high-level expert group on fake news. So we prefer talking about self-regulation. We prefer, as Reporters Without Borders, asking authorities safeguards of independence for journalism. According to us, this is the better way to choose when they get to choose if they have to broadcast media. For example, when we talk about regulators, we choose if the media can be broadcast in the country, CSA in France. We don't want them to behave as censors. We want them to ask safeguards of independence for the media. And regarding the question, how are we funded, right? Our sponsors are. At Reporters Without Borders, we sell albums. It represents 30% of our funding. It's an album for freedom of the press, and we publish it 3 times a year. And we've got donors. We've got the list on our website from North Europe, and we've got foundation as well. And yes, this is our model, so we try to be independent, and we think we are. Selling album, and it's a great way to get money for donors and to remain independent as well. So it represents a huge part of our funding.
How much does it cost?
It's free. It's a tool for advocacy, actually. When we go to embassies, for instance, we give it and we say, you could improve your ranking in this map, and we give some arguments.
Thank you very much. I would now pass the floor on to John. Maybe you could stick with the same question, and if you also want to address who should fund quality journalism, that would be interesting.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't address the Reporters Without Borders question because it's already been done. But 2 things. One, on the funding, I think the question of who should fund quality journalism. Well, who does fund quality journalism? What has happened since the business model of circulation and advertising fell through the floor for newspapers is that we've had Michael Schutzer knows more about this than I do, but he will correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me there's been quite an upsurge, especially in the US, of institutions and individuals funding journalistic centers. ProPublica, the investigative group in New York, is always mentioned, but then there are many others. And there now are centers, I think in most, if not all, at least one center in all major countries and in many smaller countries in Europe, which are funded by private individuals or private institutions in order to do investigative journalism. There almost certainly is much more investigative journalism. Plus, it's been augmented by leak journalism. Panama Papers kind. It seems to me that some of these lead you into difficult areas, like the NSA revelations, where you are bringing out, to a degree at least, valuable material, telling people what's happening with surveillance or monitoring of their communications, which most people didn't know about, known by very few. But you're also putting into the public domain material which could assist, and almost certainly has assisted, governments and centres which societies like ours know good. Nevertheless, there's been an enormous change, and that's part of it, and part of it shows that there is a willingness, at least so far, by individuals to keep journalism going and keep good journalism going. In some cases, journalists, newspapers and TV channels can keep it going because they make a profit, and many still do. Sometimes it's rather fragile. Great newspapers like, I think, Elodie will correct me if I'm wrong, Le Monde, Corriere della Sera, The Guardian, make losses and have rich people to prop them up, as indeed the New York Times did with Carlos Slim, one of the richest men in the world. But so far, they more than stagger on, they do rather well. On regulation, in the UK there was a large thing happened with regulation. A few years ago, it was discovered, by The Guardian in fact, that tabloid newspapers led by the News of the World, which was the biggest selling paper in Britain, Sunday newspaper, published by Times Newspapers, which was a Murdoch company, was hacking into phones regularly, into mobile phones, which apparently is fairly easy. They the reporters hired private detectives who knew how to hack in, and they hacked into people like our dear royal family, celebrities of all kinds, sports people, and so on, and found a huge amount of material which was then appeared in News of the World and in its sister daily paper, The Sun. Ironically, these papers, which specialized in journalism, which had a distant relationship with the truth very often, actually became truer. And they became truer because they had the raw material, i.e. the mobile phone material, which they used as the basis of the stories. The stories became more accurate, but they became more criminal as well. That was discovered. There was an inquiry into it called the Leveson Inquiry, which recommended quite severe regulation by a thing called Ofcom, the Office of Communications, which regulates the BBC and other television and radio companies in the UK, and can and has closed down channels, including one called the Islam Channel, because it breached the political neutrality clause in the contract. And there's another Leveson inquiry possibly coming along, relationship with the police. A number of people, including some journalists, have said that we should have regulation. We should have state regulation of some kind. Actually, that's which has been mooted is rather small. It certainly won't mean that people stop doing investigative journalism and so on. However, it seems to me a bad idea to bring the state in any form to regulate newspapers which are unregulated and should remain so. Critics say, well, yeah, but look at what they do. They harass people, they bully them into, they write lies, and they say all kinds of stuff which we don't like, and that's largely from the liberal side. The argument, well, that's what you get with freedom. You get rubbish as well as enlightenment. And I think that were we to start down that road, politics and politicians would have a much easier way in to stopping what they disliked, as well as what was potentially criminal. So I'm against media regulation, and I also think now, because of what I was saying earlier, the enormous quantity of material that's out there, which has got no fixed abode in a country, in one particular country, makes regulation more or less impossible, as well as undesirable.
Thank you. Anna, if you please address
Michael asked a question. So if the question is whether I've seen some large-scale, extremely effective media literacy program, no, I haven't. I think this is actually a very new thing, but I've seen examples of small-scale, successive programs in various parts of the world, including Hong Kong, for instance, in the United States. I read about such programs. I've been in Armenia recently, where I've seen such a program. So I think it will take time, and of course it is a very complicated issue because there are particular political contexts where this kind of education, to put it mildly, is not so welcomed. In fact, Hungary has media literacy, like a countrywide media literacy education program. It just came to my mind, which is not necessarily that effective, if you ask me. It is also a question to what extent it is possible to have such an education, but I see there is a growing interest. I see more and more people realize that it is important, not only because of politics or the spread of political news, but also, if we talk about literacy, how you use Tinder, it's also part of the story. Privacy issues, like a few months ago someone published an article in The Guardian about a woman approached Tinder and they released her personal data, and many people are not aware of that. So it is not only the political reality that can trigger an interest in media literacy education, but just the daily habits of people. So in this sense, I'm hopeful, but again, it's not a question. I mean, it's not something I can say like yes or no, unfortunately, as in so many situations of life.
Thank you. We had one more question from Wojtek. I will give the floor to you, and maybe after that we can continue the conversation during the coffee break.
Thanks. So very briefly on the technological side, these platforms. Because the Reporters Without Borders you work in the areas where actually governments are less democratic also. And don't you see also the benefits of having foreign, meaning usually American companies, providing platforms that are not penetratable by the governments that want to limit the freedom of expression? Because there is a delicate balance. Of course, you're right to have this sovereign rights over freedom of speech, freedom of media, freedom of expression, within control, for instance, of the EU regulation. Whenever it's not possible, is it not a better development to provide the services on the platforms that are existing, and they are indeed not in control of a given city, a given country that perhaps is not fully complementary with global standards. And one other issue, but that's only technical. When I mentioned that the Polish government is trying to have this reclaiming media and so on, they're using a very similar arguments. And it's not a comment to you really, but it's a point of information. Basically, the government is using the narrative that is produced by human rights activists or people sensitive to human rights to use it for putting some media under control. And it's sensitive issue, perhaps worth monitoring and also responding on such a
Yes, just because I know it's time for the coffee break, but just toward yes, governments are some governments are lying and trying to manipulate information and sometimes using human rights defenders' arguments. And that's why we've got to occupy this field and to claim our arguments and to tell again that we prefer self-regulation. We prefer to media stakeholders to decide what are the standards to get their code of conduct, and not to get those code of conduct imposed by governments. And regarding the platforms, I'm sorry because I didn't understand well. Yes, we think that we don't know exactly so far to what extent they collaborate with. We've got an idea actually, but with some authoritarian regimes, we totally understand that they are sometimes a useful tool for journalists as well. And we defend some media outlets; they couldn't exist without Facebook. And so this is why we're still discussing about it with them. But you've seen Mark Zuckerberg in front of the UN Congress, and it can give you an idea of the discussion with them. We will get back to you. So I think it's time for the whole civil society to pressure them more. But we can discuss it more around the coffee.